Yeah, I mean, what an honor to be invited to have a conversation about your own story, your own life. Thanks, Dave. I don't know what we're going to talk about today exactly. You know, I've been pondering that since being invited. Dave did give me the very simple task of sharing my story, so I guess there's nobody who knows that better than I. It'll be a mix of vulnerability, adrenaline, excitement, and Dave's intellectual curiosity guiding us through what we talk about today. I just want to start by saying what an honor to be asked to share your story, right? Just to reflect on that for a second. Like, how often does somebody say, will you come and tell these people the life that you've lived so far? You know? So thank you, Dave. And thank you all for being here, signing up to listen for a second. It's also a challenge and a half, I gotta say. I'd much prefer to tell other stories that, you know, are sort of outside of me, I think, a little bit, and it's easier. Because, yeah, the challenge of sharing, you know, what kind of path I've walked on, some of the things I've seen, and some of the things I can share, hopefully, that would be valuable to you all. That's a really challenging task, honestly, because I think we're all in our heads kind of always wondering if any of it's validated at all, right? So, yeah, Dave's going to bring up my Google Slides, which, yeah. Luckily, he reminded me yesterday that I had to do slides, so, yeah. I thought, yeah, so, and I did do, you know, we do live in the modern age. I'll just set you guys up right now for the slides that, of course, I went to ChatGPT, and I sat down, and so I made that very open kimono for you, just to sort of show you my process in my slides, just because I think it's fun right now to see the way people interact with this artificial intelligence. It's genuinely a revolution that we're living through right now. I feel like that farmer that was plowing in the field the day before, and then somebody shows up with a steam engine, and I'm like, how many fields can I fucking plow in a day now? Right? So, like, especially as information workers, people that work with language, fundamentally that's the first technology, right? And here it's now been extended into a whole new realm of being able to do that. So I use it regularly every day, and I'd say that's sort of one of the first lessons learned in the modern age right now. If you're kind of sitting down to write anything originally that would take you long enough to get a hand cramp if you were still handwriting, you need to get hip to any of the LLMs, really. The DeepSeek thing is very real too. I downloaded that app the day it came out and was blown away, like the whole markets that lost $1 trillion of value were as well. So yeah, I'll let the slides follow me. Oh, okay. Yeah, cool. Good. We're gonna keep it simple. Oh, but you gotta go to slide 1 though, because I gotta set it up.
My mouse doesn't seem to like me.
Or slide 1. Zzz. Yeah. All right, so I set out, and I think I went through like 3 iterations before I got to like what the smaller slide will be every time, just the bullet points that kind of my conversation with my GPT, Alex, I call it. I deliberately have continued to use it, but I did name it Alex, and it knows its name is Alex, and we have a lot of conversations. So I kind of got, just in the sort of smaller text, the sort of the theme of what I wanted to say today. And then at the end, I asked it, okay, can you actually, because you'll see I put a bunch of quotes, and I said, I need a Kurt Vonnegut quote, because this is probably one of the first storytellers that ever truly spoke to my mind and the way I see the world. And he still does today. And even though he is the late Kurt Vonnegut, I said, hey, can you edit this as though you were Kurt Vonnegut? And with the same warmth, humor, and wisdom, to hopefully have some humility in the honor of sharing your own story. So that's what we're going to see throughout. And yeah, there's Kurt every time. I'll make sure that he's stamped on those pros. But yeah, like the title is the first struggle. When you're like, how are you going to present your story? What's the title of your story? Well, yeah, pilot, founder, catalyst. I think I prefer that a little better than the grandeur that GPT just can't get away from. One thing that's pretty funny about GPT is that it will always compliment you on your pursuit as a first effort. It'll be like, that's a great idea, Jonathan. You know, and to Dave's point, ideas to the left side. I am an idea guy. I'm a cliche, and they are easy and cheap, and I can go from idea to concept on a daily basis. and then fall off of your little graph, like right there. So, do I get to press it? Okay, good. Yeah. So I start life in the Army. I flew Blackhawk helicopters. Not to sort of introduce the macabre at all, but you'll see there's a theme in my life about life and death in flying helicopters. And unfortunately, I was actually one of the pilots in command in the Army on the Potomac River. My call sign was Pat 21, excuse me. Pat 25 is who you heard about that night that unfortunately obviously didn't see the airplane they flew into. And I'll just say that when I was texting my friend Greg about it, who was Pat 25 back then, talk about an eerie thing to see on CNN, we both said it could have happened to us. That was the first instinct we have. So anybody wants to sort of hear what I was prepping to go on CNN to talk about that crash, I'd be happy to talk about it over a beer sometime. But yeah, a lot to learn about. The great thing about aviation I've learned over the years is that we iterate really well. Aviation is not a revolutionary technology. It probably hasn't been since the beginning, maybe the jet age. It's an evolutionary technology. And it's one that we should still continue to trust every time we walk down a jetway. It's a miracle. I mean, it's a magnificent thing that we do in civilization, that we're able to, to fly as the birds and even better these days. And so, yeah, I've sort of dedicated my life to that, and I drop out of college every time to do it. So that's another theme. Full spec entrepreneur here. I can't stay in school for some reason. And I like how Mark Twain talked about that too. So yeah, I mean, and genuinely starting life in the Army, I was 19, God, it's amazing to me that we can convince humans to do these things in a lot of ways. You can convince that guy to go to war in that machine. That's just I still contemplate how that happened, how it continues to happen. The 47-year-old me wouldn't agree with necessarily that path, but 19-year-old me just didn't want anything less than the real, and wanted to lean into it. And luckily, I kind of learned that I was a dove. I often said that I'm sort of a sheep in wolf's clothing when I was wearing that uniform for 9 years. Right after basic training, I was like, I got to get in the Red Cross side of this business. And so I did get to be one of the youngest pilots in the military. When I got my wings, I actually was the youngest pilot in the military that day. It's my little not so humble brag. Some child from the Kentucky National Guard took the distinction from me about 2 weeks later. But for 2 weeks, I was the youngest pilot in the entire military when I got my wings and I flew those things. And I did fly them in Kosovo as a 21-year-old co-pilot. NATO peacekeeping mission with that Red Cross. Landed in a lot of movie scenes, we'll just say, is probably to most people's experience in here. And again, I contemplate that. How does a 21-year-old mind handle that kind of, space? But, with courage and perseverance and all the things that Kurt Vonnegut said I should say about it. And I definitely did learn those things as a young guy. So we get to Skyward, which is sort of, sort of the second act in my life and career. I got out of the Army in 2006, and I ended up flying kind of all over the West, up in Alaska for, I say, 2 winters. It was as long as I could make it up there. I kind of watched too much Deadliest Catch, I think, and thought, like, I gotta go fly up there. So, yeah, and I ended up taking a LifeFlight job here. Actually, Eugene, she's a Eugene girl. I was originally a Eugeniac when I came to the Pacific Northwest over 15 years ago. I took a LifeFlight job in Eugene, and I had the plan to first finish my bachelor's degree using the GI Bill, and then I wanted to incubate a startup. I'd read enough Wired and TechCrunch to know that I was a geeky pilot, and I knew I wanted to take my shot at that. And I wasn't sure kind of exactly what to get into, but I knew I needed to be in sort of software-defined aviation. I was really compelled by this idea of a drone coming around, which I really saw as an aerial robot. And that that was the first software-defined air vehicle that was really going to start entering this airspace that I knew pretty intimately as an analog, you know, software, flesh servo pilot, you know, living in a very analog world. But there's a lot of infrastructure and rules of the road there that are highly programmatic. Like if you ever listen to us talk to ACC, if you listen to that unfortunate event that night, one of the problems that any expert pilot has listening to it is that the ATC conversation is slightly off of the program. It's just slightly. I don't know if anybody saw a talking head say something like that, but the way the Army pilot responds to air traffic control, it's not the succinct, you know, wood on the bat handshake that I expect when I hear that conversation. And yeah, it broke down. Right? But literally in the language that we talk to the tower with, there's this analog, this highly digital world that has already been established in aviation for about 100 years now, of interoperable rules and rules of the road and signs and markings. Think about it. Every time that you look out the window anywhere in the world, what color are the taxiway signs? What language are the letters in? And what color are those letters? Yellow box, black letter in English? Seem recognizable to you? Yeah, in 193 member states of ICAO, it's recognizable as well. It's one of the greatest international coalitions and global infrastructures that we actually have of interoperability. It is a proto-internet. We built a global aviation system that connected the world before we had computers. And we do it with an interoperability that looks a lot like the DNS system that comes later. A lot like it, right? So I saw those analogs. That's the way my mind works. I was like, this is a digital system that I live in. It just doesn't have software yet. And so that was the big idea. And we pitched it like no other. You know, we did the Silicon Valley thing. I went to Sand Hill Road. I tried to pitch around here. I know a lot of the spaces, closing your first safe node, and just a little one in that moment. And yeah, there's a lot of feet to beat around the beginning stages. And I told Dave I was going to share today that I didn't have the most success in our community in starting Skyward. I'll go to the next just picture. Skyward was basically, you know, the pitch was if you could take all those rules of the road I understood as an analog helicopter pilot, if I could team up with some smart software people, which I did, then you could code for those rules. And you could connect these robots to them, and you could then fly a network of robots as a network themselves, basically, in regulated airspaces. That was the Skyward pitch. That was a concept that got formed in NASA called UTM, or what becomes uncrewed systems traffic management, sort of a digital air traffic control system you could picture like. In other words, it wasn't just my idea. Like, it was open truth that anybody with enough expertise could see was the way this river of technology goes, right? And that's sort of one of the metaphors that I kind of picked up along the way that I still use today is that, I don't know, this maybe gets almost a little spiritual, so forgive me that, but we're all in a river, and the river knows where it's going, and it's going that way, for sure, towards the sea. And sometimes when we're on the startup journey in particular, or any kind of project that like really stimulates us, gets us driven, we spend a lot of our strokes in the river trying to go downstream. And those are usually wasted strokes compared to the pace the river's gonna take you, right? And so I've learned to kind of make my strokes in alignment with the flow of time that I'm in. And I didn't do that back then. I did a lot of trying to, you know, I think paddle down the river. Another metaphor that I use with this project is I think we were trying to push a rope uphill. You don't see networks of flying robots right now screwing in light bulbs on interstate towers. That was a story I told in Sand Hill Road many times. We'll build a platform, an operating system for being able to network these robots into regulated airspace. And then we'll have a geophysical plane that is equivalent to the information plane we all know in these little supercomputers in our pockets. So that we'd have the equivalent of kinetic apps, right? Not just in the air, we could see a ground space as well that, yeah, I would sum it up as a specialized drone will screw in a light on a highway, for example, like an app does in the information plane today. And so that was the vision. It was a good one. We told a good story. There's still a promise there's still a total promise in it. There's a timing problem with pitching Skyward in 2013 at first, 13, 14. Commercial drones weren't even legal then. We went through what's called Part 107, a couple years into the project with venture backing already, where it became first legal to fly them commercially at all. And yeah, I mean, like I said, aviation is an evolutionary technological river, and it has a slower, wider pace than maybe the TechCrunch stories that I'd read about in the sort of tech world. So that's good. I mean, I actually like the pace of aviation for the most part. I think it's a well-tempered infrastructure and for a reason. But yeah, we raised $8 million continuing to tell the story of the future, right? We were able to do it in all of the rounds that you've read about. I don't even know how many rounds I went through anymore. I can't remember how many saves and how many seed 1, 2, 3, 4s we called it, because we kept not being there in the optics and the storytelling of the next venture round that needed to be told about a Series A. Like, we were always going after a Series A that wasn't there, because what's the definition, right? You gotta, your pre-revenue, your seed, right? You gotta get some money to be, then you're in the A, and then you can start scaling all these theatrical syntax that we learn. When you're trying to sell a conduit to regulated airspaces for this like rising tide of robots that don't exist, you got to keep telling a story about a future that's still fitting to get there and come. And luckily we were able to, get people really pretty astonished with flying robots, I think. We rode what has been called aptly, the hype cycle. And if you guys have seen the Gartner hype cycle, the first one, this hype cycle is this first little bell curve, right at the beginning of a major technology that gets adopted. And everybody gets frothed up. I think every year they print it and they put where the technologies are on it today. Like AI is probably sitting at the top of the first hype cycle right now. I haven't looked at it today, but we rode. I mean, I am a little wave surfer, guys, for real. Like, we rode that thing. We nailed it. I mean, we got so lucky because we caught that little wave, and that we kept telling that little pitch into that future, and it looked kind of like there was a wave to the future because all these other investors were investing in these robots that aren't here. And so there's sort of I get criticized for saying this in the wrong circles, but it's kind of a Ponzi scheme. If you just kind of keep trying to get the next round based on the idea that isn't actually based in a real market yet, if you're in that space, which is like all I lived in Skyward until we sold it to Verizon, thank goodness, then you're not really in business. Like, you're in a theater of sorts that is about sort of marking to market bigger fish buying smaller fish until it's a big enough fish to become an unprofitable company like Uber in the public markets. Like, it's amazing how long that scheme can go before it becomes like the fundamentals of business. So I'm here to tell you, yeah, we raised $8 million. We sold it to Verizon, I guess 7 years in. And we sold it for more than $8 million. Sold it for less than $100 million. You know how you know that? If I'd sold it for more than $100 million, I have to tell you that in public with an SEC filing. So I was advised to never say the number in public, because now you guys just wonder. Somewhere between 8 and 100. It was enough to change my life, help me move on to a new chapter of being the VP of Global Aviation Policy for Verizon. I made that shit up, right? Because so I was now I'm really we're in Verizon. We have the industrial category space to cause a flying IoT. That's why they fucking bought us. There was a VP at Verizon. It's I'm going to build a flying IoT. And he was trying to do it in his 150,000 person company with 2 unions. And we started meeting with that team, that product team of very capable engineers, good meaning people, good people, but not capable of creating the kind of vision that we were able to sell at the agile startup level. They just had too much bureaucracy. Now, could talk at length about Clayton Christensen and the innovator's dilemma. I lived through it. So sold at the top of that hype cycle, surfed that wave. We were the only drone software company in that first cohort to sell to a Fortune 500 company. Like, there are a lot of bodies buried. If anybody paid attention to that, my cohort in the drone world, you heard of companies called 3D Robotics. Chris Anderson wrote an article on Wired. You probably heard about them. $150 million gone. Airware, you might have heard of, led by a friend of mine, Jonathan Downey, had Andreessen, had all of them, had Larry Ellison on his board. I had dinner with him one night. It was the flashiest, most Silicon Valley-est thing ever, and they were really going to take the whole thing. To talk to Jonathan, I'd be like his cooperation-friendly buddy that he was going to crush, and he had that attitude. They had that whole culture around it. $100-something million gone. And so that cohort, everybody doing noble work. Drone Deploy still exists for what it's worth. Mike Wynn and their team and Jono, really good guys from South Africa. They were in the very first sort of meeting we all had down in San Francisco as well. And just a little interesting side story about Drone Deploy and Skyward. So at first, me and my team we were at the University of Oregon. I told you before I dropped out of the Oregon MBA there. And we were like, we got to be in the software space of drones, but not like build a drone. That was as much idea as we had at the time. And we thought, because Dana Marr was my CTO co-founder at the time, and he came from the GIS department, and I was obsessed with GIS, the Global Information System, just maps, just digital maps, right? And I thought, drones, we gotta be mapping, is what I kind of thought, right? And that was sort of the first idea. And then I met Mike Wynn, and they had a company called Drone Deploy, because their first thought was, we should figure out how to deploy these things on LTE networks. And by the time he and I spent a weekend together sort of geeking out and exchanging ideas, and I ended up sending him a PDF, 150-page PDF of the rules of the road that I was talking about over that weekend with him, that I was flying to as a LifeFlight pilot still actively. I'm still flying every day to these rules. I'm like, here, you should take this PDF, and you guys got to know all this stuff to deploy those drones, trust me. And he turns back to me in the email, he goes, this should be your business. And you should get out of this mapping stuff. He's like, I think we're better at that kind of thing. And it turns out they were. I mean, they did a great job of getting into a real vertical in the space that actually existed, which is use these flying cameras as sensors and start to build photogrammetry with them. It makes sense in a lot of industrial verticals too. So we swapped business models over, and it's also why it speaks to, I never think it's a good idea to not share your idea. So when companies think that they're in stealth and that they're protecting IP that's inherently in their heads or something, that to Dave's graph that he laid out there, there's so much more work in the actual execution of getting an idea into a real market that, God, it makes that first part of protecting the idea seem cheap, especially compared to what I can garner from talking to other people about the idea at every stage of it. So sort of one of the myths that I like to tell everybody about it. I introduced them the personal journey. This was the beginning of my meditation practice, which is now, I looked at my Apple Health yesterday because I was encouraging another partner, a friend of mine who was having a little bit of a stressful time in the journey. And I was like, do you meditate, man? And he's like, oh, I hear this a lot. Oh, I walk, I like nature, I listen to music sometimes, I ride my bike and trans out. Just to be clear, meditation is a very clear practice. If anybody else is a practitioner, I see some nods, this is an exercise that I would say the analogy you're looking for is not a metaphor to riding on a bike and feeling a trance. It's that meditation is to our minds what cardiovascular exercise is to our bodies. That's the better analogy. And once you understand that, and I encourage you to at least start walking every day to get your cardiovascular health up, but I'm talking about your mind, that's the analogy. And even if you just adopt a 5-minute a day practice, it will objectively change anyone's life, I can say, and it's completely subjective to find out. There's no experiment I can do to prove this to you scientifically. It's your experiment to do. I did it about over 10 years ago. I'd been sort of intellectually curious around meditation and Eastern thought in general. And then I decided at a very stressful time, I mean, all of these mouths to feed, all these mortgages, all these rent checks, and no money, no Series A again. And I just like, well, I can't drink anymore. So 2 new babies, like it was, I lived a lot of cliches. But luckily, like that's what I found then. It was like, I got to try something else. And because I'd been intellectually curious about Buddhism, mindfulness in general, I'd read enough books, I finally said, let me grab an app and let me do this. As I'm always encouraging friends, do it. Do it 10 minutes for 10 days. And then just subjectively decide, is it providing you the clarity and equanimity and clarity of mind to see things as they actually are, not as the way we tell ourselves they are all the time. Then you get superpowers for it, especially if you practice it on a daily basis. So number 1 recommendation to all entrepreneurs, meditate daily. Can't do it enough. I'm like at 20 to 30 minutes a day now, but I started with just 5. And it's all about the regular habit. So, So today's focus and presence. Yeah, that's a better title than Catalyst and Creative Contributor. Today's focus and presence. I decided to put a picture up there of my kids, for the love of God. There's too much talk about all my work life. One of the things I learned along the journey is how much I value time across the sort of portfolio of my time. And that one of the things that I suffered in the apparent success of Skyward, again, you don't see any robots screwing in light bulbs on interstates right now. And for what it's worth, I didn't give you the epilogue there. We sold the company with 25 folks in it, total acqui-hire with 1 patent. Not that that mattered, but I guess technically I look back, I guess it kind of did. I'm not a big IP guy. I like, if you can't tell, I like open information. So we did sell with like 25 folks, and over the next, I guess, 5 years, I was there for less than 3 of them. They grew it to about a 150 person division. It became something called Verizon Robotics that still exists there today. A couple of folks still work there from the original team, but about 2 years ago now, they dropped the Skyward aspect of the project and the brand and the airborne LTE modem that we were able to build, and just went away into Clayton Christensen's, one of the other troughs of where innovation just goes to die. So that's sort of the epilogue, and that's why I bring up that epilogue, because it looks like a success, especially in a crowd like this. Like, oh, he raised the money, he went to Sand Hill Road, he got the big sell to the big company, he got to wear the golden handcuffs and get crushed by bureaucracy and leave. Like, I did it all like that way, but it's not a success. Like fundamentally, can't tell, I'm actually driven by the vision to fucking digitize and make software defined the management of my beloved aircraft in space. So things like what just happened on the Potomac don't. There's like a very simple drive there, like we can do better with this. And we should become more in the information age as aviation. So it really drives me. And so now I have this like portfolio life of where one thing I don't at 47 value anymore is being the guy who's going to be the founding CEO that's going to go have those sleepless nights that I have to adopt a meditation practice to handle. I'm like, I want to be a catalyst. I want to have an eclectic view to how I spend my time and interests in that time and where I focus it. And I'm very fortunate because of that life-changing event of sort of the platform of Skyward become Verizon. I get to start these other projects with really interesting founders and builders that are in the bandwidth of their life on the journey that it makes sense to be like that. I play a catalyst to FlightSense, which is an AI company. I'm also an active flight instructor in helicopters and airplanes still. Fly out of Grove, Pearson, all these places. So, and I love to teach people how to fly. I love to fly. I love to share it with people. So that was out of that project of just teaching people how to fly and realizing, oh my God, there's so much I need in software. I teamed up with a guy named Taylor who knew how to build no shit AI, and we did, and we've got it in the market really nicely now, and I'm considered a founding advisor. Yeah. KinectAir was my top line here. Foremost, Charles, Dave, amazing. We built an on-demand air charter app that, here's another sort of not full success that I can keep waving my hands or not. Like, We set out to democratize aviation, use really big words about being able to go point to point in a regional air mobility pattern, supported by NASA. Again, there's my beloved NASA. Do a lot of the public conversations about this with NASA. And we weren't right somehow. Like the theory is all right. We built a great app with these guys, and I can't recommend Foremost enough. Having built my own engineering teams with venture money, and then having venture money, really more angel money again for KinectAir to build the app again, I said, actually, I want to partner with a shop that knows how to build instead of internalizing that this time. So really good choice. You guys have proven that over the years. And you continue to. KinectAir continues to exist. We have leaned it down enough to exist on its own almost, and it continues to have gratefully a super angel behind it that believes in the project as much as any of us do. But I will share another story. We spent, 3 years, and I think we were probably at about 4 million of Andy's money by then. Because you guys got an intimate view. As you said, you got the behind the scenes view. And they built this frictionless marketplace that we were preaching that we could do, and we got the right kinds of aircraft on them, and that are more democratized in their price points. And we did build even an empty leg marketplace, which is the albatross of all air charters. That if you're going to charter me down to Bay Area, who's going to get me in the airplane back, right? That empty, 40% of air charters empty legs. So we're really going after that with software, right? Makes sense. I can see everybody nodding. It makes sense. Oh, I should totally build an on-demand network, right? We're right again. But the truth is that we had the moment where we couldn't even buy as many eyeballs as we got when we got very lucky with not lucky. We did a press release that got caught. Got caught by CNN, then Fox News, and then Supercar Blondie, who I'd never heard of before, but you texted me that night. You're like, dude, you're on Supercar Blondie. It's like, who's Supercar Blondie? Apparently more important than CNN. So I follow her now. But so we had that moment, and we had if you run these things by KPIs and eyeballs at the tops of funnels, and you're trying to get conversion rates, which is kind of where we were. We proved to ourselves we couldn't fucking get conversion rates. We stuffed more eyeballs at the top of the funnel in that moment than we could ever pay for. And we had residue. We still have residue on the platform from it.
Hundreds of thousands in
we broke the app a few times. It was all these wonderful cliches, and we didn't convert any more flights. Not one. Why? Because the average price of our flights are $600 to $800. And it's still a 0.1% demographic kind of idea to buy that mobility. So somewhere, no matter how good the theories were, we didn't get to $3,000, which is kind of where the theories pointed. And we didn't get to marry up to the upper 10% demographic, which is households that make $180,000 or more. That starts to seem realistic around here. Intel, Nike execs, 2 of them want to go to the Bay Area. It makes sense again, right? I don't know what the lesson is here. I'm still reeling from it. We weren't right. You got to listen to the market. I think that's enough from me saying what we're doing. Oh, Ulu Partners. I help people now professionally, teams, leaders. I don't like the term coach, although, because it's just become a little bit of a category that's sort of self-ascribed. Although I will say, Michael Jordan has a coach, and that coach is not as good as Michael Jordan at playing the game of basketball, but makes Michael Jordan the greatest basketball player of all time, right? So the idea of a coaching relationship is very, very real and helpful to anybody on the journey. We do that at Ulu Partners. We've got a few clients now. And and then otherwise, the rest of my portfolio life is doing stuff like this and supporting guys like Dave and other builders to just try to keep the beat going on. Yeah, there's some more of the businesses. That's the airborne RF thing is what continues in my life from the Skyward Verizon journey. Those guys got it. This is an Austrian company that has been there as long as Skyward has, and I knew as soon as I left and I was unencumbered, I asked to be an advisor of this company, because if it is going to happen, it's through them, because you got to know where the robots are connected to get to an aviation grade, basically, if you will, and we still don't quite know that. But these guys do. Anyway, it's neat to have a portfolio of really neat projects to play with. And then this is the one that I get up with every day and do every day in that portfolio. It's called Akute. And this is like, yeah, bringing together my old LifeFlight boots on the ground, dirty boot helicopter flying days in EMS, and adding a little technology to it, and it looks like that.
Cool.
Yeah, and that's just a still shot.
Actual.
Yeah, and so we're actually moving into, I can't remember all your categories again. We're beyond validation. We've done this now a couple times live. You guys can go to akute.org and you can see we did a live demo in Malibu in December where this comes from, and we were able to cut ground response times in half. And that's, I mean, do I have to sell you any more on that? I mean, we'll save 5x the lives being able to put paramedics in these things. Yeah.
Can you say what that is? Is that a manned aircraft?
Yeah, that is a uniformed paramedic. Tim Lum is his name. He also happens to be the first owner of one of these aircraft. He bought it recreationally, and he happens to be a paramedic, so he's our chief pilot. And he's kind of the perfect guy. He's flown it more than anybody else. He lives up in the Cascades of Washington. Yeah.
You used to have to be a pilot to fly it.
You don't.
Fly itself.
You don't actually. So this aircraft has been built for over 12 years. I'll just say it's a well-backed company without saying its name. Go look up his name. There's a guy that really likes flying cars out there, and he's backed this one as well. So it's really well backed. It's important in this space. And they built a very viable aircraft. So we actually started this project about 7 years ago. I just sold Skyward to Verizon, and I got invited by my friend Matthias, my now co-founder of Akute, down to a conference in San Francisco that was hosted by Falck, which is the second largest ambulance provider in the world. They're a Danish company. Matthias is also Danish. I still haven't figured out the nepotism that led to this, but we all, some aviation folks got in a room with these EMS folks and like ambulance folks, and we got to hash a bunch of numbers. And I was, obviously one of the aviation folks. Actually, I was the only guy who'd ever flown what we call helicopter EMS HEMS before, so I got to be like this special little unicorn in that group to say, no, I don't know if you could really do it this way or that way. And yeah, we did the numbers, like from the econometric view, just point at it dramatically. Just like your business. I was going to make a joke about death and taxes. You got the best TAM there is everyone. So it's pretty amazing. Yeah. Well, we're kind of in the same business here, and I don't like to get too over the top with the life or death notion of it, but I've lived in that seat for much of my life, and I can tell you it really matters, really affects people's lives. Like we used to say, we're the best part of your worst day. If I show up in a helicopter and an ambulance, you're lucky, and you're having a hell of a day, no matter what. So this is that, and we learned in that conference 7-8 years ago now that if an aircraft could get down to sort of one human-sized portable size, like footprint, and land in a cul-de-sac, was sort of the theory of geography from the aviation side, then we will save roughly 5x the lives in a current suburban pattern, right? And it's like this unbelievable math curve that you talk about a pull on the rope is just dramatic. And it's the big five. It's cardiac arrest, what's called a STEMI, a special kind of heart attack, stroke, overdose, and massive trauma. And those five you got to react to, and your entire EMS system with its brick and mortar infrastructure is built around a 6 to 8 minute response time that most municipal departments achieve, which is amazing, and it saves a lot of lives. Like Eugene Springfield, who we're going to work with in our first pilot program here soon, they're at 50% in their number with a 6 to 8 minute response time in the big five. They save people's lives half the time, so coin flip even if you're still in the city. Just outside of it, it's about 10%, and you can see where our 5X is right there. We had a theory of 5X, now we're in the applied, and it is 5X. And so now we just got to get the paramedics actually flying to the scenes. And for what it's worth, the other cool thing about like the startup angle on this is a nonprofit. Matthias and I are like definitely steeped in the wool tech operators, you'd call us. Like we both have articles written on us in TechCrunch, right? He was at Uber and Airbus, and he did the whole deal a lot more than I did. And yet we knew that to make the art of the possible here across technology and really the public domain of saving people's lives, we had to carve it out as a 501c3 and what we call ourselves as an NGO, a non-government organization. It's got a lot of peculiar interests in it. It's a lot like a tech startup. We have no cap table. We have no equity that we have no hockey stick we can go into. Although we do represent potentially 10,000 units within 10 years of these things, we could project onto a map pretty easily. So I think I'll stop there.
It sounds like a great point. John, thank you.